Welcome back to part 3 of our series on DNA and RNA. Today we start on looking at RNA. Previous 2 videos we focused on structure of DNA and how DNA copies itself. Now we're starting on RNA, which RNA is like the messenger of the cell. The DNA has the instructions for how to run everything in your cell. But when it wants to send a message, when it wants to make one particular thing or tell another cell or another part of itself one particular thing, it makes this RNA, because DNA does not leave the nucleus except during cell division. And the only thing that happens during cell division is you separate into 2 cells. So not a lot is going on during cell division in terms of maintaining life. So anytime that it wants to send a message or maintain life or build something, it has to send this RNA because it is the messenger of the cell. And DNA stood for deoxyribonucleic acid. RNA is similar, but instead of deoxyribonucleic acid, it is just ribonucleic acid. And we get the initials RNA from the R in ribo, the N in nucleic, and the A in acid. There are 3 different types of RNA. We have mRNA. tRNA, and rRNA. There are more than that in types of RNA, but these are the 3 that we're going to look at. In fact, we aren't even going to focus on rRNA much, because all that rRNA does is it helps build the ribosome, which is where you make proteins. And that's all you need to know about it. So we are not going to focus that much on it. There are 3 types of RNA. We're only going to focus on 2 of them, the mRNA and the tRNA. The mRNA stands for messenger RNA. And it is what actually sends the message to the cell of what needs to happen or what protein needs to be built. And the tRNA stands for transfer RNA. This will be helping to build the protein when we get to that stage, which will be in 2 videos when we talk about RNA translation. Until then, we're only going to be focusing on this messenger RNA. Only focusing on this messenger RNA, which builds the message. Now, the structure of RNA is very similar to DNA in that it is built out of these things called nucleotides, which a nucleotide is built up of phosphate, sugar, and a nitrogen base. Same thing as DNA. And this is called a nucleotide. And just like in DNA, you get strings of them back to back and you build this molecule. But one thing you'll notice that is different is there's nothing on this side. That's because, unlike DNA, which is a double helix, RNA is only a single helix, where you only get these nitrogenous bases on one side. You only get a single ladder. In DNA, you would get this double ladder, where you have it on both sides. RNA is only a single helix. It is only a one-sided twist. So, just like DNA, it has nitrogen bases. And just like DNA, it has 4 nitrogen bases. DNA and RNA both have adenine, which is A. They both have guanine, which is G. They both have cytosine, which is C. But there is no thymine in RNA. There is none. Instead, we have uracil. We have this base called uracil, which takes the place of thymine. Which means, even though in DNA, guanine and cytosine matched up, and adenine and thymine matched up, here in RNA, guanine and cytosine will still match up. But adenine and uracil will now match up in RNA. So when you have adenine on one side, you will have uracil on the other in RNA. That is about all that we need to know about the structure of RNA. With our next video, we're going to be looking at how RNA is built. Where does this RNA come from? How does the DNA build the message that it needs to send out to the cell? So that will be our next video, called DNA transcription.